Before I start this video, make sure to use my TCG Player affiliate link down below in the description. Also, if you do want to support the channel even further, consider becoming a patron. There are some great benefits including giveaways, early access to videos, and can be featured in gameplay videos in the future. For today's patron shoutout, I'd like to thank Neil Farwell for supporting the channel. Again, I can't thank you enough for your support, and with that out of the way, let's get into today's video. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today in Pub Stomp MTG, and in this video I wanted to go over the new Murders at Karlov Manor deck, Revenant Recon. And this is a pretty powerful deck being in Dimir colors. So just to kind of give you an overview of this video, like all Precon upgrades, I first will discuss some of the new cards that are in the deck. Also, I'll discuss reprints, some great powerful reprints that could really boost up the deck. And then later on, I'll discuss some of the cards that you should add to the deck. Usually I put about 10 cards in the list that I do upgrade, so without further ado, let's go over the commanders because there's two commanders, the front-facing commander being Mirko, and also the backup commander being Marvo. So first up, Mirko, Obsessive Theorist for 1 blue and a black. It has Flying and Vigilance. Whenever you surveil, put a 1/1 counter on Mirko, Obsessive Theorist. And at the beginning of your end step, you may return target creature card with power less than Mirko's from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter. So basically a finality card or counter reads, if you would die, you exile it instead. So this is a very powerful ability. Of course, you want to keep surveilling, and surveilling is very good for the deck because when you do surveil, you put cards into the graveyard, baby big beefy creatures or small little creatures. You don't really have to go super crazy with the creatures because later on you'll just reanimate them with Mirko anyways. So either way, going big or small is really good. The backup commander is pretty good too. I do love the creature typing with Octopus Rogue. It is for 3 blue and a black. It's a 1/8, and whenever it does attack, you clash with the defending player. And whenever you win a clash, draw a card, then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value 8 or less without paying its mana cost. So this can be pretty powerful. It's not really diving into the reanimator strategy, it's just cheating in big creatures for free. So regardless, I feel like either one of these can be a great commander. I feel like Mirko is a little better in my opinion because of course you want to dive into that surveil mechanic so that you could really dig deep into your deck, put a big creatures in your graveyard, then reanimate them at the beginning of your end step with Mirko. So I'd personally pick that one to basically upgrade the deck with. So without further ado, now that I mentioned the commanders, let's now focus on some of the new cards of the deck. Alright, so there's a lot of fun and exciting cards that I do want to talk about in this deck list. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm going to go over most of them. The first one I do want to go over is Copy Catchers. This one is really fun because it's just 2 mana. It does have flying, and whenever you do surveil, you may pay 1 and a blue. If you do, you create a token that's a copy of Copy Catchers. If you do have a lot of mana lying around and you're surveilling a lot, you might as well pay into this ability. The more you do surveil with this, the more you're going to make token copies of this. Also, the more copies you do have on the battlefield, they will have the same ability. Say for example, you have 3 of these on the battlefield, you have 6 mana total, and you surveil. You can pay into those abilities and make 3 extra copies of this. So this can be powerful in the right type of situation. Another card I do want to mention is Unshakable Tail. So whenever this does enter the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, you will surveil, so you could trigger your commander or you could trigger other things like the card I mentioned previously. Also, whenever one or more cards are put into your graveyard from the library, you investigate. Not only that, you could pay 2 mana, sacrifice a clue, and return Unshakable Tail from your graveyard to your hand, so that's very good for recursion. Then you could play it later so that you could get that surveil trigger. So this is a great value engine for a commander, constantly surveilling at the beginning of your upkeep, and if we keep playing this on the battlefield, we could just get more surveil triggers. However, beware of the Foreboding Steamboat. This could be pretty powerful in a lot of different situations when it does enter the battlefield. Each player chooses 2 non-token, non-vehicle creatures they control, exile them until Foreboding Steamboat leaves the battlefield. So this is pretty similar to Grasp of Fate. Obviously, you're only focusing on creatures on the battlefield. Also, whenever it does attack, you put a card exiled with it into its owner's graveyard. If you do, you investigate. So in a way, this acts as great removal as you swing away with the Foreboding Steamboat. I did also want to bring your attention to another counterspell with Counterpoint. This is an interesting counterspell because honestly, I'm not a big fan of it being 5 mana, but let's see what it does. So a counter target spell, you may cast a creature, instant, or sorcery, or Planeswalker spell from your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to the spell's mana value without paying its mana cost. So it's pretty decent. Again, I don't know if I like my counter spells being 5 mana. 5 mana to hold up is quite a lot, but it can be manageable in some situations. It's more of like a I got you card, because if we do have a lot of big CMC spells in our graveyard, and if we counter a spell with like 2 CMC, that could be kind of bad, but in some situations, if you counter like a big giant spell, you could get some value out of it. So either way, it's okay, not my personal favorite, but you better watch out, somebody is staring at you. It is the Eye of Duskmantle. What was kind of funny about this image is I actually was looking at these spoilers at night and I was clicking one by one, and then this just came up. And not gonna lie, it had the biggest jump scare I've had in a while compared to other horror movies that I've seen recently. Regardless, let's read what it does. It does have flying and lifelink, being a 3/8 body. You may play lands and cast spells from among your cards in your graveyard you have surveilled this turn. You may cast a spell this way. You may pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So this can be pretty decent in most situations. It does have lifelink, so it can gain you some life, but it really focuses on that surveil ability, especially if you want to use your life as a resource. So a decent card, but some horrifying art for sure. Another card I did like that's a good reanimation target that I did want to mention is Watcher of Hours. So for 6 mana, does have flying and ward 3. Whenever you remove a time counter from a Watcher of Hours while it's exiled, you surveil 1, so you can suspend it for 6 by paying 2 mana. So it can be used for reanimation, but you definitely want to use it for a suspend ability. Just for paying 2 mana for it, you basically will get 6 turns that you could be using this surveil ability. So with your commander, this can be a really good outlet just to constantly surveil each turn. However, I do want to mention the last card, and that's Final Word Phantom. So for 2 and a blue, it does have flash and flying, and during each opponent's end step, you may cast spells as though they had flash. This is actually really good. I think this is actually the best card out of the whole entire Precon as far as new cards go, because of course there's some amazing reprints, but having that ability to cast things on flash speed is really powerful. This is only on your opponent's end step where you could cast things at flash speed, but again, that's very good tempo plays. Maybe I might just be overhyping this card, but this is one of my favorite cards that are new within this set. However, I do want to go over reprints. There's a lot of great reprints in the deck, and so let's jump into it. Alright, so I'm here on MTG Goldfish. This is a great website to check out. Basically the full deck list of some of the Precon products like Revenant, Recon. There's also the other Precons that you can check out. I'll post the link down below in the description. Regardless, this is an absolute banger of a Precon. There's so much value within this Precon specifically. This is probably I would say tied with the Bant one. Maybe Bant has a little bit more. I'm not 100% sure on the price on that one. Okay, so they're about even, like $175 and $176. So Revenant Recon has a little bit more value just by $1, but that's probably just bulk prices at that point. Regardless, Mirko is really good. I feel like this is a great Precon out of the box if you do want to choose that one specifically. All the reprints are very good. I do want to go over them a little bit. Phyrexian Metamorph is a really good card to copy artifacts on the battlefield, like maybe that one ring that somebody has. Or if they do have a big giant scary threat, now you have a big giant scary threat. Doom Whisperer probably synergizes with the commander most because of course the more you surveil by paying 2 life, you can just keep buffing up the commander, and also you're dumping things in the graveyard each time you do surveil too. So Doom Whisperer probably has the most synergy with the commander and by far one of the best cards you can be playing in the deck. I would also like to point out Sir Conrad the Grim. Not that it's necessarily an expensive card, it's just a very good synergizer with our commander because each player mills a card. That does include ourselves, and so we could just mill cards into our graveyard so that we could reanimate a big target. Dream Eater is pretty good too because when it does enter the battlefield, you can surveil 4, and also it does have flash, so you can out-tempo your opponents a little bit. Grave Titan is a good one. I mean, it just enters the battlefield. You make 2/2 bodies on the battlefield, and it does have Death Touch. Very good one overall. Massacre Worm is a really good target for reanimation so that you can just remove cards from your opponent's battlefield, and could also potentially make your opponents lose 2 life each time that a creature they control dies. But now this is where we're talking about. Reanimate is a really good target. Also Toxic Deluge. Honestly, having them both within this same Precon is pretty crazy. I think with the Lord of the Rings set, one had Reanimate with the Hosts of Mordor, and also Toxic Deluge was in the Hobbits Precon, and having them together in this one just makes me think, man, they should be doing that every time. But regardless, this is a very stacked Precon full of amazing goodies, also including Rise of the Dark Realms being the best reprint of this deck. Obviously, it's a very powerful card, especially in the more creatures you do have in your graveyard, but also in your opponent's graveyard. This could potentially be a great win con of the deck. Also surprised to see Necromancy reprinted. It does have a different art. This just has the base copy. that's online right now, but it probably will be updated eventually. Regardless, Necromancy can be a pretty good reanimation target, and the lands are kind of subpar, kind of normal with all the other precons. They always have to do us dirty with the lands. Regardless, in this video, I'm not going to really upgrade the lands. I'm focusing more on the creatures and also some of the other cards you should be adding in the deck. And so with that said, let's get into some of the upgrades. So I'll be quite honest, this was probably one of the hardest precon upgrades I've ever had to make in my channel. This deck really just has amazing synergy with each other, but if you want to upgrade it a little further, you could use cards like Unmarked Grave, Entomb, and Vile Entomber. Even though most likely you're going to be dumping cards into the graveyard with us for availability, why not get a specific card? Unmarked Grave focuses on a non-legendary card, Entomb goes a little bit further, being an instant spell and searching any card in your library to put into the graveyard, and Vile Entomber is basically an ETB version of Entomb on a body. Each of these are great in their own right. I do especially like Vile Entomber because you could basically mill it into your graveyard, then reanimate it later with Mirko. Especially if we surveil more, we could easily get to that mana cost of 4 compared to the other cards that would be like 8 or 9 mana. But I do like graveyard tutors like these because they bring a little bit more consistency to your deck. Also, I know I said I wouldn't bring any lands up in this video, but I did want to bring up one. I'm kind of cheating a little bit with Restless Reef. This does bring more utility compared to mana fixing. It does have that ability of becoming a 4/4 shark on the battlefield with Death Touch. And also when it does attack, target player mills 4 cards. Most likely ourselves, we're going to be milling cards so that we can reanimate targets later on. I feel like this is just one way where we could just dig a little deeper into our deck, put cards into our graveyard so that later on we could reanimate big threats. However, if we are putting a lot of cards into our graveyard, we might as well take advantage of Terror Tide. So for 4 mana, all creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So Lost Caverns of Ixalan was a really good set for graveyard strategies, and this is no exception. Basically acts like a Toxic Deluge for 1 more mana, and it doesn't use life. It's all based off of your graveyard as far as permanents are concerned. Regardless, another Lost Caverns of Ixalan card I do want to mention is the Ancient One. So this is an 8 power, 8 toughness body just for 2 mana. There is a catch though. The Ancient One can't attack or block unless there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, which is pretty easy in this deck. We're going to be putting a lot of cards in our graveyard with the Surveil ability. Plus, if we really need to put stuff into our graveyard, it does have an activated ability of drawing a card, then discarding a card. When you discard a card this way, you target player mills cards equal to its mana value. So most likely we will be targeting ourselves, and honestly with a lot of big creatures in this deck, we're going to be milling ourselves a lot where we could just swing in with this and block with this whenever we want. Another creature that's great at milling cards is Gyruda Duba Depths. This does have the companion ability where you could basically make it the companion of the deck. With Mirko, it is 2 CMCs, so it does have an even converted mana cost, so this could potentially be your companion of the deck. You will have to remove odd converted mana cost cards. However, I probably wouldn't make it the companion of the deck because there's a lot of odd converted mana cost cards in the deck that are very good. But I will say this does have an incredible ETB. When it does enter the battlefield, each player mills 4 cards, put a creature card with even converted mana cost onto the battlefield. So if 4 total players are playing the game, most likely we're going to be putting something on the battlefield regardless. Another card I did want to highlight is Breach the Multiverse. This is incredible in the deck. Of course, I feel like I've been putting this in a lot more decks recently that have graveyard strategies, but each player mills 10 cards. Then for each player, you could basically steal the best planeswalker or creature in that graveyard and put it onto the battlefield under your control. And I'll tell you what, this card can be ridiculous at times. This is a good game finisher in any deck. So what cards do we want to reanimate? There's some great cards that we can reanimate, like Sheoldred the Whispering One, Sheoldred herself, and Nezahal Primal Tide. I feel like these are great ones to reanimate. I especially like Sheoldred the Whispering One, such a classic commander staple card that kind of fell out of favor. However, in this deck, I feel like it's still pretty good. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature, so obviously this is really good in the deck. Also, what's very good about the new Sheoldred is the fact that it does have a great ETB of each opponent sacrificing a non-token creature or planeswalker they control, but I do feel like the best part about this version of Sheoldred is the fact that you could exile Sheoldred and put it onto the backside with the Saga, and you could remove that finality counter you did have with Mirko. Then it does have those 3 abilities of destroying creatures, each opponent mills cards and also discards cards, and then you have a Rise of the Dark Realms ability in that last lore chapter. So Shieldred and the backside of the True Scriptures are amazing synergy with our commander. Regardless, I do also want to talk about Nezahal Primal Tide. This has that great ability whenever opponent casts a non-creature spell, you draw a card, so we could drown our opponents out in card advantage when they cast non-creature spells. Plus it can protect itself, and you have no maximum hand size, and the spell can't be countered all in one card. I just love shoehorning this in any deck where I could ramp into it, or I could cheat it into play with a reanimation decks. Plus, hey, it's a dinosaur. I love dinosaurs, so of course I'm going to try shoehorning this in. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on upgrading the Revenant Recon Precon deck. This is a very cool deck, and honestly, I really had a hard time upgrading it because honestly, it's chock full of value. It has a lot of reanimation spells like Rise of the Dark Realm, Reanimate, Animate Dead, and also, what was the last one I'm trying to remember? Necromancy, that's what it was. And so again, there's a lot of stuff that you can utilize in this deck to take advantage of big giant creatures. But let me know down below in the comments, what do you think of this deck? Do you plan on buying this deck yourself? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.